Good evening and welcome. I'm Heather Carlile, and as usual, I remind us to know ourselves, to treasure life, and to love others. Tonight, it happens to be Labor Day. And if we're talking about labor, and we're talking about helping couples have a better marriage, and part of my book on rebuilding trust, how couples start over, we work on our marriages or our relationships. And I'm sure you've heard many people say many times, if you want a good relationship or a good marriage, you need to work on it. And then do they tell you, well, what is the work? What does that look like? What's the list of things that I want to make sure that I do? Well, you just saw Jack walk by. We now know very clearly what we should do, and that it is work, and it is the most difficult work, I think, because it requires us to love somebody else. And I think of that as one of the most demanding experiences of life, because it requires that we stop looking for our own needs. We stop blaming the other person for what we're not getting or what's not there. And we point the finger at ourselves. We're know yourself, treasure life, love others. I'm not looking to get my needs met. I'm looking first for who am I, what do I do, and what are my responsibilities, and how do I become a more loving person? My favorite source of specific information about that is Dr. Scott Peck. And many of you will know his book, and I have more than one copy because it's so important to me. It's The Road Less Traveled. And he has various books, and I am one of his great fans. He has passed on now, and I haven't found anything that serves my work better in terms of thinking about love and spiritual development. So when we use developmental psychology, we kind of go there to say, well, this is what people need to grow. This is what people need to develop. And so I have this, and you've seen this before. This is Erickson's psychosocial stages of development. It's from birth to death. Those things that naturally we want human beings to develop. Well, as I mentioned last time, I changed that trajectory to show the levels of relationship, because I work with so many relationships. And truth to tell, our relationships, what we come home to, our marriages, our dating relationships, those are the most important parts of what we come home to is home. And is that a place where we're best friends and we're lovers? Or is it troubled? And then everything else is dulled and causes depression, causes anxiety, causes us to try to run away. But we need to be able to solve the problem, right? And that's my job. So I love it. I will help you get your relationship back or improve it until you tell me to quit. I'm relentless, and there are a lot of things to learn. However, there are a couple of basic beginning things to learn that makes the hugest difference. So when I'm working with a couple where they want to rebuild trust, or they want to go to another level, or come back together, the first thing is, let's do a quick start. Let's do something very constructive and very positive right away. And so that always comes back to, what is the work of love? Because it's time for us to change our trajectory and look at what we have and what we need to build. So, you may have heard me say this before, but the number one thing that we need in terms of love is paying full attention. There are a lot of things underneath that, of course, and it's tragic how many times I hear people say, well, I have ADD. I have attention deficit disorder. Well, I'm not sure. Sometimes that means many things, and it's not a disorder, and it's some style of using or not using the mind. So there are many things I believe that we can do about that. But paying full attention. And of course, you know that if there's a one word, a one capability that has to do with paying full attention, that's listening. And so there are many things that we'll talk about tonight about listening. So I wanted to say that this requires adulthood, because if you think about adolescence, we're focusing on ourselves, we're developing our identity, finding who we are, exploring, knowing ourselves by living, experimenting, traveling, figuring stuff out by doing it, or being around other people, thinking about what we want, what we don't want. An intimate relationship requires that we know who we are, so that we're now interested in loving somebody else. And that's one of the challenges with lots of relationships, and you probably know some of them, where we get together too young, before our identity is fully developed, before we know completely who we are, how we want to live, and what our sense of purpose and mission are. And when we get in a relationship, then it's a growth place. And if the relationship lasts, we usually, I think about it as side by side, go through growing pains together. I prefer the growing pains to be over 30, when we know who we are and we're finding how to love somebody else. So that means that we move from the adolescent period, which is this two-stage part here, into the next one, which is the adult period. Now, adult means I'm a fully developed man or a woman, and I have the strength and the ability to look at caring for someone else. And of course, the beginning of that is an intimate relationship. Then after that, we can also, hopefully, as a couple, care for a child. So one of the first things in order to pay full attention is what we call suspending blame. So if I'm going to pay full attention to someone else, I'm going to need to be able to do the discipline, the work of stopping my own thought process, my own interests, my own desires, in order to let in and focus on and understand the desires of someone else, of my beloved. So there's a wonderful quote in The Road Less Traveled by one of my other heroes, Sam Keen, and it's about bracketing. So I'm going to read you just that little bit because it's so intense, and I'd like you to hear the actual words. So we're talking about a mental discipline. That's the work. The work of love is actually part courage, part discipline, and paying attention to somebody else's fondest desires. So here, Dr. Peck says, I am referring to a subtype of the discipline of balancing, which I call bracketing. Bracketing is essentially the act of balancing, number one, the need for stability and assertion of the self, which is I need to know myself and to be true to myself, and balancing the need for new knowledge and greater understanding. It's difficult to get new knowledge and greater understanding unless you are able to temporarily give up yourself or give up listening to yourself or tending to yourself. Putting oneself aside, so to speak, he writes. So if we're an adolescent or a child, we don't know how to put ourselves aside because we're growing ourselves. But as adults, we need to be able to have the confidence that I know myself and I'm here appropriately for myself, but I can put aside my thoughts, my beliefs, my needs, and attend to something new. Some people find that very difficult to do. And sometimes we call it witnessing, or the ability to self-observe, where we in essence have a split consciousness, or a consciousness where we can put aside our views and our opinions in order to really let in something new. And of course, if we're working on a marriage or a relationship and it needs improvement, we need to therefore be interested and open to new things. So this is from Sam Keene's book, To a Dancing God. He says, the second step requires that I go beyond the idiosyncratic and egocentric perception of immediate experience, whatever it is in my present moment. Mature awareness, and this is what I'm advocating, that we want to be in the adult state, a man and a woman, mature people, so that we can enrich our relationship or marriage at a higher level of intimacy. Mature awareness is possible only when I have digested and compensated for the biases and prejudices that are the residue of my personal history, so that I see my biases and prejudices. Of course, we're all finding those and defining those as life goes on. Awareness of what presents itself to me involves a double movement of attention. Silencing the familiar and welcoming the strange. When you think about any arguments or disagreements or stubbornnesses you have, or fights you have in your relationship or at home or in your marriage, think about how it's the familiar. And so often couples will come to see me, and their one focus, their one way of thinking about what they're looking for is they want to stop fighting. So we need to be able to silence the familiar, all of the fighting and the disagreements, and welcome the strange, welcome the new. Each time I approach a strange object, person, or event, I have a tendency to let my present needs, my past experience, or expectations for the future determine what I see. If I am to appreciate the uniqueness of any datum, I must be sufficiently aware of any preconceived ideas and characteristic emotional distortions to bracket them. So bracket them off, put them over there, long enough to welcome strangeness and novelty into my perceptual world. This discipline, it's work, right? The work of love. This discipline of bracketing, compensating, or silencing requires sophisticated self-knowledge and courageous honesty. Yet without this discipline, each present moment is only the repetition of something already seen or experienced. In order for genuine novelty to emerge, for the unique presence of things, persons, or events to take root in me, I must undergo a decentralization of the ego. So this is a discipline, this discipline of bracketing how I think and what I think my opinions are and what I think ought to be, bracketing it and putting it over here. Not that I'm erasing it or saying it's wrong. I'm just going to put it aside for a bit. Now, that's listening. That's high order ability to truly listen. And in my book, I have a pretty lengthy self-assessment, a long quiz that helps you think about what listening is, and then to assess how well you do that particular part of listening. And I'm happy if you are to email me to send you a copy of that quiz for yourself. And my email, of course, is heather@heathercarlile.com, and you can find it on my website anytime. Okay, so that's bracketing and, in essence, giving up the self, the need for stability and assertion of the self, the need for new knowledge and greater understanding. So when a relationship is in trouble or needs to be rebuilt, the most important thing is you want to know how to maintain your bond with your loved one. That means that the most important thing in the beginning is to know what your loved one wants, what they've been deprived of, what they've been frustrated about, what they're angry about, what they're grieving about, what they've given up on. Because you want to know that so that you can do whatever is possible for you to provide it. So the first thing is you want to know. This is difficult when in a relationship one of the people doesn't talk, or is afraid to talk, or doesn't like to talk, or just has a life starting when they were a little kid where they didn't talk much. So that's one of the things that I like to help you with, because we do need to be able to communicate. And I find that usually the person who doesn't talk, really, they may look as if they're in some way oppositional, but usually it's because for some reason or another they've never felt safe, or they've never felt important enough to use their voice. And so I want to make sure that I set up an environment where it's very safe, and where we stop everything and just wait, just listen. One of the things that makes me a successful therapist, I'm a professional communicator, I'm a really good listener. And one of the things that makes listening valuable to me and utilitarian for me is I'm listening for the choice of words, of the vocabulary, and I'm looking for the sentence structure and how people build thoughts, because it will show me what they think, and it will also show me oftentimes what they're missing or what they're not seeing. And so if I hear that, and then I've listened to and I've confirmed what they're thinking and saying, then I can further interview them to find out about the things that I've noticed that they're missing, or the things that I want to know in addition to that. Which means they know they've been heard, and that I really and truly have paid full attention to them, and so that I am interested in a kind way, in a respectful way, in more of what they think. A lot of times, that's never happened before. And they really kind of don't know what else they think. And so that's a lovely place to help someone find more, underneath perhaps, or more broadly, or apply it in another way to something else that they think or they would like to say. So listening is, people think about listening as, well, I have to stop talking, or, well, that's boring, or, well, I have to be patient, la la la. But the truth is, listening, when you can make it safe, is utterly fascinating and precious. So that's why in the beginning of a difficulty in a relationship, and especially when people want to rebuild, they pay full attention to the new information because they really want it. They're interested in it. They're very sincere about what they missed, what they haven't been doing, and what's necessary now to move forward. So that means, in a certain way, giving up so much of what you've thought sometimes involves grief. Sometimes involves letting go of something that was in order to create or learn something that is new or next. That can be difficult or scary or clumsy, disconcerting, and a lot of us don't like to be in that place where we need to apologize, or we need to acknowledge that we don't know everything, or that what we did was wrong. It's hard for us to do that. It takes maturity. And if we model that for the young ones, they can learn that it isn't, in essence, taking away from who we are or our abilities. In essence, that kind of truth and honesty gives us more depth, more trustworthiness, and more courage. So, in the beginning, the painful attention is courage and discipline. Self-discipline, that is. I wanted to also read you another piece of this, because of course this is my favorite source, and it's endlessly profound and powerful, and you might want to, if you're really interested in learning about love, this is the best source I know. If you know a better source, I would like to know about it. Please tell me. Okay, I'm going to go to page 89 here and read you this piece. Real love is a permanently self-enlarging experience. Falling in love is not. So when we think about falling in love, we teach about cathexis, which is a bond. It's a connection between two people, and it's usually erotic and fun and exciting and stimulating. That creates a bond in the beginning of a relationship that's just delicious, just wonderful. However, that cathexis bond, as you may know, dwindles away a bit at a time, and then we're left with what's real love, and this part of permanently self-enlarging experience. Do you see how that's related? Do you see my cat back there? Do you see how a permanently self-enlarging experience is connected with the work of love, is connected with listening, is connected with putting aside our ideas and our thoughts and taking in more, learning, self-enlarging, right? Sometimes that doesn't come up when we're thinking about love. One of the other things that I believe is self-enlarging about love, when we experience ourselves as thinking loving thoughts, doing loving things, and exchanging communication in a vulnerable and honest interaction, that is self-enlarging. And it's expanding for us as adults. So we then experience ourselves as a loving human being even more. And I think that is the most foundational element of self-enlargement, when we experience ourselves as kind and loving. Okay. Another piece that I wanted to share is a good marriage can exist only between two strong and independent people. So if we're not matured, we're not probably going to be strong and independent, where it's a man and a woman, not two teens or not two people who are interdependent in a dependent way. So when we want to rebuild a relationship, we want to make sure that we're not needy not possessive, not saying, there's that old thing, if you leave me, I'll die. Well, then that's not love. It says, if you leave me, I will be in extreme agony, but I'm not going to threaten you with suicide, or that if you leave me, you're to blame for the loss of my life. That's inappropriate, immature, and hurtful. So we want to be able to be independent, which means freely choosing to put the other person first, not needing them, but to say, I love you, and I want to know what it is your preference for me to be and do, which will make you feel like you are number one, like you are loved. So that means listening. The greatest work of love is paying full attention. With listening, not just in a conversation, but being around each other in your life, where you notice the preferences of that person, things that you may not have noticed before, and then doing something about that mirrors. I get you. I listen to you. You're important. And here's what I can do to make sure that you know that you're number one with me. So there's another element that I just love where he uses the term leadership. Again, we're talking about leadership certain ways with our kids, with our executives, but what about in a marriage where it's not being a boss? It's not controlling. It's not saying I call the shots. It's not a power struggle. It's leadership of ourselves. Leadership of my mind, which is one of the things that we need to develop and oftentimes is not consciously taught, which is the executive function, which is I have learned how to run my own mind, and therefore my own thoughts and my own words and behaviors. So leadership of myself. So I wanted to read this little piece to you. It's so rich. Love is not simply giving. It is judicious giving. And the word that I usually like to use is wise or discerning. He's using the word judicious, where you're using good judgment. Love is not simply giving, it is judicious giving and judicious withholding as well. What's appropriate to give? What's appropriate to withhold? My preference is that we never use mean words. We never use name-calling or insults. It's judicious to never use that kind of language with a loved one, or with anyone truly. So judicious withholding as well. If we're angry, we don't just spout it out. Anger is a force, a power against what we don't want. And my preference in the way I teach it is that we use anger or frustration with discernment, and as Dr. Peck would say, judiciously, which means we hold it in outrage and decide carefully, and maybe it will take time, as to what our best course of action is to stop whatever it is that we don't like. So he says it is judicious praising and judicious criticizing. In my mind, criticism is never constructive. We may need to use a cushion statement about a complaint with a request for change, but it's not criticizing. I would never recommend that. But you forgive him for putting it this way. It is judicious arguing, struggling, confronting, urging, pushing, and pulling, in addition to comforting. It is leadership. Self-leadership in essence, right? The word judicious means requiring judgment, and judgment requires more than instinct. It requires thoughtful and often painful decision making. In other words, deciding with self-discipline how you're going to run your own mind and your thoughts and your words. So I have filled up my 30 minutes right to the top. And I welcome and invite you to give me comments or emails. It's always a thrill to hear from you. And thank you so much this evening for tuning in. And as always, know yourself, treasure life, and love others. I'll see you next Monday.